She was only 15 when the world she knew vanished beneath her feet. Parents buried, dreams stolen, promises broken by the very hands meant to protect her. Dragged into a city that never loved her, Amaka was silenced, made into a shadow, a slave behind closed doors. And when betrayal came again, sharper than hunger, colder than the street pavement she slept on, she chose to run. No money, no shelter, no voice, just a stubborn flame inside her chest whispering, "You were not born to die like this." Through nights of fear, days of hunger, and moments when the darkness almost won, Amaka fought. Not just to survive, but to rise, to heal, to shine. The silent escape, because sometimes the fiercest warriors are the ones the world tried hardest to destroy. The rain came in thick sheets, hammering the rooftops of Umanze village, washing the dusty earth into muddy rivers. Amaka sat on the cracked doorstep of her family's house, her thin arms wrapped tightly around her knees, her chin resting on the bony ridge of her legs. Her clothes were soaked through, but she barely noticed. Inside the house, the sound of wailing rose and fell like the sea, her aunts and cousins keening their grief into the stormy air. Her parents were gone, snatched away in a brutal instant when their battered yellow bus collided with a lorry along the highway to Nui. They said her father died instantly, his broad chest crushed by the impact. They said her mother had clung to life for an hour before her spirit finally slipped free, her hand reaching out for a daughter who would never get to say goodbye. Amaka was 15 years old, too old to be a child, too young to bear such a loss. She barely remembered the days that followed, a blur of funeral preparations, the steady beat of drums, the endless flow of mourners who brought food and muttered useless words like, "Take heart," and "It is God's will." None of them stayed long. Grief, she learned, was a lonely business. On the third day, as the village elders gathered beneath the mango tree to decide her fate, Amaka sat nearby, listening with dull, dry eyes. They spoke of responsibility, of guardianship, of the shame of letting a girl wander parentless in a community like theirs. "She is a girl," said one, stroking his graying beard. "She cannot live alone. We must find someone to take her." Amaka's heart clenched. She had no brothers, no sisters, no grandparents, only distant relatives who looked away when she caught their eyes, each silently calculating the cost of taking her in. And then he came, Uncle Emeka. He arrived in a cloud of dust, riding a noisy Okada, wearing dark sunglasses and a fine white caftan that glistened despite the mud. Amaka remembered him faintly, her mother's younger brother who had left the village years ago to make it big in Lagos. She hadn't seen him since she was a child. Now he walked with the swagger of a city man, a leather bag slung casually over one shoulder. "I will take her," he said grandly, removing his sunglasses with a practiced sigh of sorrow. "She will come with me to Lagos. I will put her in a good school. I will treat her like my own daughter." There were murmurs of approval. The elders nodded, satisfied. The village women clucked their tongues sympathetically. "See how lucky she is," one whispered. "City life, better schooling, better future." Amaka said nothing. Her heart felt heavy, her mother's voice echoing faintly in her ears. "Not everyone who smiles at you, my daughter, wishes you well." But what choice did she have? She rose when Uncle Emeka gestured, carrying her mother's Bible in one hand and a small nylon bag containing all she owned. As they rode away from the only home she had ever known, the rain washed the village behind her into a blur. She did not look back. Lagos hit her senses like a slap. The air was thick with diesel fumes and the sharp tang of roasted plantain. Markets spilled onto the streets, a riot of colors, bodies pressing in from all sides. Hawkers shouted prices above the endless blaring of horns, their voices rising into the humid air. Amaka's eyes widened as she clutched her thin bag tighter. She had never seen so many cars, so many tall buildings, so much movement. She told herself to be brave. After all, wasn't this what everyone in the village dreamed of? The great city, the land of opportunity. Maybe this was the start of something better. When they reached Uncle Emeka's home, her dreams began to crumble. It was not the big house she had imagined, no fences with white pillars, no tiled floors shining like mirrors. Instead, it was a two-room flat squeezed between a mechanic shop and a betting center. The walls were cracked, the roof patched with sheets of tin. Inside, Auntie Rose barely glanced up from her television drama. She wore a wrapper tied carelessly around her waist, her hair tucked under a net. "This is Amaka," Uncle Emeka announced, pushing her forward. "She will stay with us now." Auntie Rose wrinkled her nose slightly, but said nothing, waving a dismissive hand before turning back to her show. Amaka stood awkwardly, unsure of where to sit, what to say. No one spoke of school. No one spoke of uniforms or registrations. Instead, the next morning, before the sun rose, a sharp knock on her door woke her. Auntie Rose thrust the broom into her hand and barked, "Clean everywhere. After that, wash the clothes outside." And so it began. Each day blurred into the next. Mopping floors until her arms ached. Washing piles of dirty clothes until her fingers cracked. Fetching water from the communal tap. Cooking meals she was rarely allowed to taste. If she dared complain or move too slowly, Auntie Rose's slap would sting across her cheek, followed by a stream of insults about useless village girls. School became a distant dream, like a story she had once heard but no longer believed. Sometimes, at night, lying on a thin mat in the kitchen corner, Amaka whispered to the cracked ceiling, "Mama, Papa, can you see me? Did you leave me to this?" No answer ever came, only the soft hum of mosquitoes and the distant roar of Lagos, uncaring and endless. The days in Uncle Emeka's house blended into each other, thick with the smell of sweat, pepper, soup, and resentment. Amaka learned to move quietly, to finish chores before anyone had a reason to scold her, to vanish into the background. Still, nothing she did was ever enough. "Lazy thing," Auntie Rose snapped when Amaka's back bent under the weight of laundry baskets. "Ungrateful girl," Uncle Emeka muttered when he counted out coins for market errands, as if her existence alone drained his pockets. She began to feel like a shadow, something half alive, half forgotten. School was never mentioned again. Her once bright dream of sitting behind a classroom desk, clutching a book against her chest, faded into a dull ache. One night, after a long day of errands that left her bones sore and her stomach empty, Amaka crouched in the corridor, scrubbing the cracked tiles with a wire brush. Her knees were raw, her hands stung with soap burns. From behind the parlor door, she heard muffled voices. Curiosity flickered, just enough to pull her closer. She pressed her ear gently against the rough wood. "The woman from Libya is coming next week," Auntie Rose whispered eagerly. "She needs strong girls. Amaka is ripe and she won't ask too many questions." "How much will she pay?" Uncle Emeka asked, his voice low and greedy. 50,000 naira cash, Auntie Rose replied. "Enough to settle our rent and buy that generator you want." Amaka's heart thudded painfully. They weren't talking about marriage. They weren't talking about sending her somewhere safe. They were planning to sell her. Like a goat, like a bag of rice. She pressed a fist to her mouth to stifle a sob. Her whole body shook with silent terror. They were willing to trade her life for cash. That night, she could not sleep. Lying on her thin mat, the ceiling fan spinning lazily above her, she stared into the darkness, thinking. The desert stories she had overheard at the market came rushing back, young girls vanishing, never to be seen again, their bones bleaching under the burning sun. If she stayed, she would be lost. If she ran, Lagos was a monster city, uncaring and vast. Where would she go? What would she eat? Who would help a ragged girl with nothing but a broken spirit? Still, she knew one thing for certain. She would rather die on her own terms than be sold like an animal. Amaka waited until the house had sunk into deep silence. She crept from her mat, moving barefoot across the cracked floor. In a small bag, she packed the only thing she owned, a faded wrapper, the torn Bible her mother had given her, a cracked photograph of her parents, smiling in happier days. Quietly, she lifted the latch on the rusted iron gate. The night greeted her like a giant mouth, hot, humid, hungry. Without looking back, she slipped into the streets of Lagos. She was free. But freedom, she quickly learned, had its own sharp teeth. The streets were a different world at night. Streetlights flickered and died, leaving long stretches of darkness broken only by the headlights of passing Danfo buses. Men with hooded eyes leaned against crumbling walls, sharing bottles of cheap alcohol. The air smelled of roasted maize, engine oil, and danger. Amaka kept her head down and walked quickly, clutching her small bag to her chest. Every step was a prayer. At first, she wandered without direction, following the faint hum of life, the late-night hawkers, the shout of a drunkard, the distant beat of a nightclub. She found an abandoned kiosk near the market square and curled up against it, her body trembling from exhaustion and fear. The concrete was cold against her skin. Mosquitoes buzzed mercilessly. Her stomach gnawed at itself with hunger. She cried herself to sleep, muffling her sobs into her wrapper so no one would hear. Morning came brutal and bright. People bustled past her without a second glance, rushing to open stalls, balance trays of fruits on their heads, or sweep the front of their shops. Amaka sat up slowly, brushing dust from her wrapper. She was invisible, just another forgotten street child. She spent the day wandering the marketplace, searching for scraps. When she asked for food, some vendors waved her away sharply, others shouted curses. Dirty girl, get away. Once, a woman selling oranges shoved a bruised fruit into her hands without a word. Amaka devoured it in seconds, the juice burning her cracked lips. Hunger became a dull companion, humming behind every thought. At night, she returned to her corner by the kiosk. She hugged her knees and rocked herself slowly, whispering broken prayers to the stars. By the third day, her body had begun to fail. Her head swam with dizziness. Her legs wobbled beneath her as she tried to walk. She stumbled across the busy main road, narrowly missing being hit by an okada. The riders cursed at her, shaking their fists, but she barely heard them. She collapsed near a kiosk, too weak to care anymore. God, she whispered through cracked lips, please, help me. And then just before darkness swallowed her completely, a shadow fell over her. A woman's voice, firm but kind, pierced through the noise. My Picken, what are you doing here? Amaka blinked up, her vision blurred. There, standing above her, was a woman in a simple wrapper and headscarf, carrying a bag of yams with strong arms. Her face was carved with lines of hardship, but her eyes were steady, full of something Amaka had almost forgotten how to recognize. Kindness. The woman knelt beside her. Where is your home, child? She asked. Amaka opened her mouth to answer, but only a broken sob escaped. The woman nodded as if she understood everything without needing words. Come, you cannot stay here. She helped Amaka to her feet and wrapped an arm around her trembling shoulders. Together, they walked away from the marketplace, the busy street swallowing their small figures into its endless tide.